Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stephen Rubenstein. I am the chair of ABNY. On behalf of our organization and my co-pilot in all things, ABNY CEO Melva Miller, I want to thank you all for joining us. In a few moments, Melva will introduce our distinguished panel as we celebrate Black History Month and Black excellence. Unfortunately, our Lieutenant Governor, Brian Benjamin, isn't able to be here after all. He's recovering from COVID, and we wish him well and a speedy recovery. At ABNY, we care about elevating Black voices within our membership and within our broader community to be a forum and a catalyst for partnership. We always strive to be a hub for ideas, action, and investment, whether it's banking at Black-owned community banks like Carver, commissioning works by Black artists as we did during COVID, or working with CBOs on priorities like the census. That's been true of ABNY going back to our earliest days with the late, great David Dinkins, who was a guiding force for us for decades, as was Percy Sutton, Charlie Rangel, Basil Paterson, father of our former governor who's with us today, we're proud to have with us. And I have to mention Helen Marshall, who was a huge influence on the illustrious, on our great CEO, Melva. So as an organization, we want to shine a spotlight on the rise of today's generation of Black political leadership that's setting a new course for both our city and for our state. And there are many places to look, as so much of the leadership of our city and state is from the Black community. Passionate, talented, effective, longtime public servants who have risen to the highest levels of government. They are the voice for all of us and the leadership that's going to help us pull through this pandemic. We're thankful for that leadership and excited to be on the road back from this painful and awful experience we have all had in COVID. And with that, I will hand it over to Melva, our CEO, to introduce today's panel.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and setting the stage for today's conversation as we celebrate Black History Month 2022. I also want to thank our panelists for joining us for this very, very timely and important discussion. And with that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about them and the constituencies that they serve or served in the past. So let's start with Bronx Borough President Gibson.
Thank you so much, Madam President and Mr. Chair and everyone at ABNY. Thank you so much for hosting this very important celebration of Black History Month. Black history is American history, and American history is Black history. There's no way in our society we can talk about American history without acknowledging and recognizing the incredible contributions of Black Americans here in our city and across the country. I am Bronx Borough President Vanessa L. Gibson. I bring you greetings from my beloved borough of the Bronx, and I am the 14th Borough President. I made history on January 1st as the first ever African-American and female elected Bronx Borough President. It's such an honor to say that because I know that many have paved the pathway for me to be here today. Prior to my short time at Borough Hall, I served for 8 years as a member of the New York City Council representing the West Bronx. And prior to that, I served as a member of the New York State Assembly for 4 years. And I give all honor to my Lord and Savior for guiding me, to my mother, Phyllis Gibson, who was my queen, and to my political mentor and political mother in all things, the late, great Aurelia Green. I'm honored to be with all of you, my distinguished panel, Governor David Paterson, Senator Leroy Comrie, and Councilmember Pierina Sanchez. Grateful to be with all of you, and I look forward to our discussion today.
You know, and now you guys have to follow that, right? But I do apologize. I should have started in sort of constituency size first. So I'd actually like to ask Governor Paterson to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself and history. I do apologize, Governor Paterson. I should have yielded to you first.
Good afternoon. I'm David Paterson. I am a recovering governor. I have moved on to the private sector since those days. I really liked the borough president's comments, particularly when she talked about being the first African-American and woman borough president of the Bronx. And it's an historic day that we have this Black History celebration, because within the last hour, President Biden has named the first African-American and woman to the United States Supreme Court when he chose Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to be a member of the United States Supreme Court. The other comment that the borough president made that I want to follow up on a little bit is that Black history is American history, and American history is Black history as well. But what's interesting about that is without Black history, there's a lot about American history that we never would have learned, particularly that the first Memorial Day was held to honor Black soldiers who had been detained even after the South had signed an agreement that the Civil War was over, and 257 of them died in a unused racetrack and jockey club in Charleston, South Carolina. And on May 1st, 1865, they held a memorial for those brave Black soldiers from the 21st Negro Infantry Division. And that was called Decoration Day. Those decoration days were followed in other freed Black communities in the South, but then were followed by the regular Confederate Memorial Days. And when Memorial Day finally came to be a national holiday, they forgot about the Black soldiers or the Black people who were involved and only celebrated those who were on opposite sides of the Civil War who were white. So this just more Black history is more understanding of American history.
Thank you, Governor Paterson, for dropping those jewels. Yes, we must be reminded of our history. And it's always a pleasure to learn something new every Black History Month and every day of the year. So thank you for dropping that knowledge. Next, I'd like to ask Senator Comrie to introduce himself and give us a little bit about himself and his history.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be part of this program. I want to first thank ABNY, the Association for Better New York, my fellow colleagues and panelists today, former Governor David A. Paterson, Vanessa Gibson, Bronx Borough President, Council Member Pierina Sanchez, and also a great friend, a brilliant young person, and our thought leader, our moderator, Melva M, for the Chief Executive Officer for ABNY. I'm honored to be part of this Black History Month program. As Borough President Gibson said, Black history, our history is Black history, and Black history is America. I'm honored to have been able to pass a bill in the State Senate where we are finally going to delve into the history and memorialize the history of Black participation in New York since its inception as a state. I've been honored to have passed that bill on a 400 committee to make sure that we do everything necessary to memorialize all of the historic events that happened that Black people were a part of within New York State. The governor made an announcement 2 days ago to formalize it. And I would ask everyone that whatever you know about Black participation in New York history to please inform my office or to reach out to us so that we can make sure that it's memorialized. And also what we know about current history. I'm honored to have come represent Southeast Queens. I represented Southeast Queens in the City Council since 12 years in the City Council from 2002 to 2012. 1 year as Deputy Borough President, and now this is my 8th year in the New York State Senate. I'm honored that I have so many powerful people that are in my community now, such as Melva M, who's a constituent, such as Kyle Bragg, the president of DC 37. I have 8 union presidents that live in my district. I have many powerful leaders in the business community. I have many people that represented the community, including Brian Benjamin, who grew up in the district, and actually his first internship was interning for me when I worked for my predecessor, the late great Archie Spigner. So Black history is everyday history as well. And I want to remind people, I'll paraphrase something that Senator Obama said, we are all Black history. Everything that we do impacts our friends and neighbors. It impacts the young people that we see every day. It impacts our children and our loved ones. And we have to make sure that we continue to represent Black history by doing everything we can by being a full participant in government, a full participant in society, a full participant in making sure that our concerns and our ideas and our passions are articulated through every level of government and the private sector. That's the only way that we're going to restore our communities come back from this pandemic fully and realize the things that we need as a community. So I'm proud to be part of this program, and thank you for inviting me this afternoon.
And thank you, Senator Comrie, especially for calling me young. I really appreciate that. Thanks. And last but not least, I'd like our newest elected city council member on this panel to introduce herself, Patina Sanchez. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you so much, Melva. And it is such an honor. I'm looking at the screen and I'm seeing my co-panelists and I'm pinching myself because it's still just surreal to be an elected official and to be in office. And it's just such an honor to be with you all here. So I'm Pierina Sanchez. I represent the City Council community of District 14, which is in the Northwest Bronx. We are about 98% people of color in our community. That's about 70% who is identifying as coming from the Latino diaspora, and another 28% or so that is coming from the African and African-American community. But what I'm here to talk about, and what is so important to me on a personal level, is that there is no real separation between us. There is no real separation. Across the globe, there are tens of millions of people from the African diaspora, African Americans, Africans of all stripes. In Brazil, 55 million. In the United States, 47 million. In Haiti, 10 million. In the Dominican Republic, another 10 million. And the list goes on. And so for me, as an Afro-Dominicana, representing a community that is so steeped in our African roots and African history, it is such a proud moment to be able to be on an esteemed panel such as this and to be able to talk about what that means for our community, what that means for me on a personal level, and what it can mean for building power across all of the constituencies that have been left behind for so long, but who are so resilient and so powerful and so incredible that the potential to be tapped is going to lead us nowhere but to the sky. So thank you so much, Melva, for inviting me today.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because, one of the questions that I have for you today is, talking about you identifying as an Afro-Dominicana with the two lineages of very rich cultures and traditions here in our city and in our nation, but with different paths, right? And, I'm sure there are many thinking, why is she on this panel? What is the connection to Black History Month and to sort of all that we will be discussing today? So I really appreciate you sort of addressing that up front, because we're gonna get to it today, right? We're gonna talk about the things we need to talk about on today's panel. So I really appreciate you addressing that. So let's jump right in, right? So when we think about the challenges facing Black New Yorkers, right? Especially at the intersection of income inequality, lack of generational wealth, unemployment, right? Data came out about 10 days ago citing that while white joblessness decline steadily increased over the last year, still 1 in every 5 Black New Yorkers is either officially unemployed, stuck in part-time work when they really want full-time work, or just discouraged that they've exited the job market, right? So how do we really prioritize these solutions for the Black agenda for New Yorkers? And in that, how do you measure and espouse Black excellence in public service and the work that you do presently, and whether it or in the past, to really address these inequalities, right? And especially looking at your constituencies. How do you really measure Black excellence as we sort of deal with this intersection of all these things, especially coming out of COVID? Not even, or we're not out yet, but dealing with COVID. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Governor Paterson, if you'd like to address that question first.
So when Governor Mario Cuomo was in office, and this happened about nearly 40 years ago, he started a minority and women's business enterprise program to try to generate greater contracts and procurement between the state of New York and qualified women and men-owned Black businesses, along with Hispanic businesses as well, and also women's businesses. And it was completely eradicated by Governor Pataki for the 12 years that he was in office, to the point that in 2007, when I came to the executive branch, only 2.63% of the contracts that went to women-owned businesses, even though the women were 29.2% of the certified companies and 51.8% of the population. And for the minority communities, the situation was worse, to the point that with African Americans were 8% of those certified and only 1.9% of those who were able to receive procurement. So we started these programs, but you look up now, and a qualified minority-owned business that does work for the MTA would have to recertify themselves to go to the Port Authority. And in 2022, that has to be the most inept use of government that I can think of. The reality is that the next step in terms of generational wealth is that we have to change these sort of apprenticeship programs, which had their use at the time, but that time has run out, to partnerships. And it's through partnerships, and they don't always have to be 50-50 partnerships. These businesses can grow, the money can circulate in the community rather than going right out of the community as it does now. And in the post-pandemic era, it would emancipate the wealth of many people who have the ability, have the training, but can't get the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know, I think you're absolutely right on target when we talk about sort of income inequality and we talk about building generational wealth. We know that a pathway is through procurement opportunities, right? Just by simply doing business with government, because as we hopefully all know on this call, that government is required to procure goods and services from minority, disadvantaged, women-owned businesses due to disparity studies that have been done over time. So, you know, making sure that, you know, that actually happens and that we are utilizing the tools that were put in place by Governor Mario Cuomo back then and making them better, I think is like a no-brainer. So thank you for sort of shining a light on that and giving us the historical context behind that. And, you know, and I'm going to throw it to Councilmember Sanchez, because, you know, I know that you've spent a lot of your work looking into communities, looking at sort of community economic development pathways for economic growth and thinking about things like housing policy. And now that you're the chair of the City Council's Committee on Housing and Buildings, you know, sort of thinking about how do we use those tools. So if you can just basically address the same question and building upon the governor's point about sort of procurement opportunities and ways of building generational wealth and addressing income inequality, that would be great.
Absolutely. You know, and I'm almost like, wait, that's where I was going to start. So I'll start from a different perspective or note, which is, you know, I'm an urban planner by background. I worked for about 4 or 5 years at the Regional Plan Association. And I was there at such an interesting time because a Regional Plan Association is a nonprofit that takes a look at New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut and makes long-term, long-range regional plans. And so when I was there, we were working on the 4th regional plan. And, you know, it's fascinating to really take a bird's eye view and break up a region of 3 states into half-mile by half-mile squares and look at everything from intersection density, what is built where, how is it built, where are our health facilities, where are our schools, how are our schools performing, what are the property tax rates, every single thing that we could look at to get a sense of the economic vitality, of the social vitality, of the resilience of these different communities we were looking at. And so when I was there and I was the New York State director and really focused on community partnerships, you know, you can't get away from who you are, right? Like I was born and raised in the Bronx. I'm like, yo, I don't see my people in these boardrooms. I don't see them. We got to be there, right? When I was in these spaces and I was looking at all of this richness in data, I couldn't help but say, we got to call the question. What are we asking? How are we asking it? What are we trying to get at? What I'm trying to get at, what is most important to me for my career and what I want to look back when I'm 80 years old or 90 years old and say, I made a dent on something, is equity, is racial and economic justice. And so that means that the way that you ask the questions, the way that you frame your research and your findings and even your outreach, all of that has to be intentional from the start. And so when we talk about procurement opportunities and when we talk about all of the different ways to build wealth, it has to start with at the planning stage and at the ideation stage and at the policymaking stage with saying, how are we going to make our outcomes better for the Black community? How are we going to make our outcomes better for the Latino community? How are we going to do that for the disability community? And all of the areas of intersections where we know we need to make a difference because our society and our city and our country, we're just not delivering. And so for me, that means absolutely the economic power of government to transform and to build generational wealth is paramount. But it's also about, that money directly in people's pockets, but also where are we investing to build new health institutions? We're getting a pilot, we're getting a lot of money from the federal government to build back, to recover from COVID-19. Where exactly and how exactly are we going to spend these funds? And so it's about, making sure that we're framing the questions, we're framing the plans for how government works, how our subsidies are doled out and all of these things in a very intentional way. So, that equity analysis is something that I'm gonna definitely have at the forefront on the Housing and Buildings Committee. And it's something that I will continue to urge all of my colleagues in government and business everywhere, no matter your lane, to have that focus.
Yeah, and thank you, Councilmember, for sort of bringing it out a little bit, talking about that framing, right, and how we sort of look at the issues and taking it from sort of policy to implementation, right? And I think a lot of times when the intent is there, when policy is created and laws are created, and then following that through implementation is sometimes where it gets tricky. And I'd like to just throw it to both Bronx Borough President Gibson and Senator Comrie to sort of address the question as well, because you both, Senator Comrie has been a legislator in many different levels on the city and state side for a very, very long time. And also Borough President Gibson has also been a legislator in the state and in the city. So if you can also maybe just address, as we look at the intersection of issues facing Black New Yorkers as we try to gain ground, what are some of the ways you think we can sort of promote this Black excellence in thinking about the Black agenda? So whoever wants to jump in first.
Okay, Senator, you want me to go first?
Yes, I don't mind. Thank you. One of the things that I'm honored to be chair of an important committee in the Senate, corporations, commissions, and authorities. And through that, I have been pushing to make the NTA more transparent in their contracting so that we can see exactly how much money are actually going to MWBEs. On the Senate side in general, we've been pushing to make sure that the MWBE the research on MWBEs is brought up to date, that we're forcing state agencies to do more in transparency on how much they're doing to MWBEs, and actually making sure that the M in the MWBEs is brought to the forefront, and it's not just women-owned businesses that are taking over everything. And we know who most women-owned businesses are front for actually males that own the company. So we've been pushing also the Economic Development Corp for the state to do more to access the capital for minority entrepreneurs as well. As our Councilmember Sanchez said, and Senator Paterson, Governor Paterson said, access to capital for entrepreneurs and for startups is the biggest thing to create opportunities for minorities to be able to really get a real piece of the business opportunities and contracting opportunities to come up. So we've been on the legislative side, on the state legislature, pushing really hard to make that happen. I was able to get both the MTA and the state to do a transparency bill to show exactly what they're doing on contracting level. And also we're working on forcing regular reporting from all state agencies on a quarterly basis to show what they're doing as far as their spending and procurement is done. And we're also working to make sure that our corporations that are getting contracts from the state are being more responsible as well, to MWBEs, to development, to entrepreneurial issues. And the biggest thing that I'm working on is getting the Port Authority. As you know, we started a new JFK to deal with access for the Port Authority, but we want to make sure that it's not just for this contracting period, but everything that happens at the Port Authority. The Port Authority is one of the largest employers in the state, where there are plenty of career opportunities that a lot of our young people are not aware of. And we need to make sure that through what we do with the new JFK, that the Port Authority is giving an opportunity for access to employment information and career development, and also procurement from every level, not just in contracting, but in purchasing and legal services and ad services. The Port Authority advertises all over the place. We want to make sure that there's a strong MWBE component in all of that as well. So we're continuing to fight to try to make that happen. As the borough president said, access to capital, the employment opportunities for young people. If we can make that clearer for young people when they're in junior high school or in elementary school, that they can have a path to a job at the airport, that they can have a path to the job at ESD or one of these major businesses or major corporations. And it's incumbent upon us as legislators to push open those doors so that that path can be open. And it would change the dynamics of education. It would change young people's self-esteem. It would give people a path to excellence from early on. And it would definitely change the spirit and culture of our state. And that's our job as legislators to try to make that happen. I don't know how much I can go on each segment. I could go deeper into what we're trying to do on a state level with specific agencies, but just to give it a broad stroke, we in the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus are trying to make sure that every state agency has an MWB procurement that's better than 20%. Most of them are only still dealing at around 9%. So we're going to be really pushing hard on the governor and every state agency to open up their books even more. Thank you.
And we thank you for that leadership, because if anybody can get that done, it's you, Senator Comrie. So we appreciate it. And I know both Councilmember Sanchez and Governor Paterson has to jump. I know Councilmember Sanchez has a hearing that started a minute ago. So I want to just get, before we go to Borough President Gibson, I want to give them both an opportunity to address any last points you'd like to make for this panel today. First, I'll go to Councilmember Sanchez and then Governor Paterson.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. And my apologies. They did the thing where they double schedule you, and it's my first hearing, so I'm very excited. I just wanted to pick back up from the introduction and comment about that intersection between the African history, the global nature of the African diaspora, and the African community here, right? For me, Blackness is really about embracing, celebrating, and loving the history that reached us here, right? And understanding, right? Understanding the difficulties and the pain as well, but understanding that shared nature. I too, as a person who is descended from a family from the Dominican Republic, am descended from slaves. And so I just wanted to share this quick anecdote as when I was on the campaign trail and I would walk into, I walked into everywhere. It didn't matter. It was like, it could have been like you were doing something that maybe you shouldn't have been doing on the stoop. And I would talk to you, go into every barbershop, every bodega, I would walk in, and my very first, lip piece had, Pierina is an Afro-Dominicana from the Bronx. And I will never forget walking into this barbershop that it was a Friday night, so there were a couple of beers being had. And it was a group of men who were listening to music, Dominican men, there was bachata and all of these things. And one of them just looks at this piece of paper and he's like, Afro-Dominicana. What does that mean? Right. And I was so glad for the opportunity then. And I'm so glad for the opportunity now, because, what I said to them was like, you're proud of the way that we dance, right? You're proud of our merengue and our bachata. And those drums, those drums in merengue and in palo and all of these styles that we have in the Dominican Republic, where that comes from? You know what that's about? that's our Black history. That's who we are and where we're from. And we have to embrace that. And we have to really remember that we are one. We are fabric of one in this community. We have different history, right? Afro-Dominican history is not the same as African-American history, although it does begin, of course, to intersect while we're here. Carlos Cook's right-hand person to Malcolm X in the times of the activism, right? And so the history intersects, but it also has this deep origin that is shared, and it is shared across time and space. And so for me, it's just so important to build on that love and to build on that power, because, you know, coming from the Dominican Republic and from a place where there's so much colorism, so much racism, and so much of a rejection from many parts of the country of that history, right? It is important to talk about it, and it's important to be proud and to be loud and to be all of these things. And so again, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on this panel, and let's be loud and proud and continue it as we fight for our people.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the Afro-Dominican history there. And let's keep sharing it, and it brings us together, because, you know, as New Yorkers, as people from the African diaspora, right, we are stronger together. So I really appreciate you sort of giving that anecdote and those stories and making the connection on today's panel. And thank you for joining us. Have a very nice hearing. I know it'll be great. Can't wait to watch it. I'm sure it'll be recorded.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Governor Paterson, I know you have to run.
So I had another Zoom I had to do at 1 o'clock, but it's been delayed. So I think Ms. Borough President Gibson hadn't had a chance to talk about the last issue, so I'll defer to her.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Governor. So just to add to what all of my colleagues have said, you know, MWBE and continuing to uplift the voices of our minority and women-owned firms is a critical part of this work to building economic prosperity. We have to support entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs. We have to give them access to capital and technical assistance and all of the grant and loan opportunities that should be afforded to our entrepreneurs of color, just as they are to everyone else. I think COVID-19 highlighted a lot of discrepancies and inefficiencies in the system. And for me, as a Black woman, I want to make sure that I uplift the voices of the folks that look like me, of giving them the opportunities that many have never been afforded. I'm a firm believer in ownership opportunities. So I love the idea of creating spaces like worker cooperatives, where you have worker-owned and operated businesses. We have a number of worker cooperatives in the city of New York, in the food, retail industry, garment industry. We need to expand on that so we have more worker cooperatives across our city. As I mentioned before we started today's call, I'm going to be working with Governor Kathy Hochul and the Lieutenant Governor on making sure that we can expand on opportunities for CDFIs. And we have to work with our financial institutions and bring more banking development districts into our city. Because one of the challenges we face as Black Americans, we don't have access to capital. No one gives us loans. No one wants to give us any credit, right? And you have to start from somewhere. We often say your credit won't get it, right? And I think that's just because we are surrounded by check cashing industries and other places and spaces that don't necessarily give us the access to capital. So I want to focus on CDFIs. I want to work on more private partnerships. I'm going to be creating a unit in my office to just develop a public-private partnership, because I don't believe the government can save us all. I think government is a critical part, but I also think you have to look at other components. The private sector can invest. They have the access to capital. They have the technical support. They have the expertise that I believe government needs. And in this world of dealing with, you know, COVID and learning about all the challenges that we faced and working and learning remotely, you know, we have to find ways to get back into other industries like tech, like making sure we focus on the digital divide. How you measure success? Yes, we have to look at indicators like the unemployment rate, right? Yes, that's important. But like Pierina said, I think there are other factors that we have to look at as well. How do we give young people spaces? How do we keep them out of the criminal justice system? Get them on the pathway to apprenticeship opportunities so they don't just think that a minimum wage job is all they can aspire to do. but they look at careers. They look at construction industries. We get back to CTEs and vocation. All of these things are critical in building economic power and wealth. And it starts with young people. It starts with youth voices. That's how you build generational wealth, because there's such a thing called intergenerational poverty, where you have the grandparents and the parents and the grandchildren that are all on the system because they haven't been taught. If you know better, you do better. But I also think it's about the resources. It's about the programs. It's about collaborations and partnerships. It's about access, opportunity, and making sure that we, in all of our roles that we have, all the titles we have to give back, and we have to continue to open doors of opportunity just as they have been opened up for us.
I love it. And I love the way you sort of framed the opportunities for partnerships across what you've said, right? Because I think that there are really opportunities when we think about workforce development programs, whether it's through CTE programs in school or whether it's internships or other types of fellowships for young people. When you talk about sort of bringing in those PPP, right? Those public-private partnerships to bring in the private sector to support the work that government does. I think, you know, for us here at ABNY, right, that's music to our ears, right? Because we love to partner with government to get things done, and we love to leverage our network and our expertise to do that. So I really love, you know, sort of stringing that through the opportunities for uplifting Black New Yorkers and really making the Black agenda more focused. Another thing you said, you know, you talked about ownership, right? So you talked about sort of whether it is through cooperatives, right? Or whether we think about sort of home ownership. And I'd like to really throw it to Senator Comrie because, you know, he really represents a district that is primarily homeowners, right? And I think that you know, throughout history, you know, his community that I know a little bit about has really been considered, you know, really trailblazers. So let's get into it. You know, this is what this conversation is about today. You know, residents in Southeast Queens who historically have been trailblazers, right, in making Southeast Queens a successful Black enclave through, you know, moving out, purchasing their homes, making a stake in that community. And then there's a newer generation of residents who embrace a more current day sort of definition of a progressive movement and progressiveness. They might not find your views sufficiently progressive for this moment in time. What would you say to them? How would you respond?
Okay, first I'd eliminate the word progressive because it's a fake word. Second, I would, you know, Southeast Queens, I'm honored to represent an area of the country that has the highest median income for minorities in the country, that has minorities that were trailblazers going back from Archie Spigna, going back to Cynthia Jenkins, going back to Leroy Carmichael, going back to, you know, the first Black elected official, Guy Brewer, which has his name attached to it. That has been home to, you know, major Black artists in the Adderley Park area, where we had, you know, major Black jazz artists that lived in Adderley Park, where we had other trailblazers that lived in the community. You know, I'm honored to represent an area that, as I said earlier, has the most Black union presidents and maybe in the country in that particular area. Also, you know, we have not only just the highest median income, we have people that are proud of their homes. You come to Southeast Queens, you're going to see homes that the lawns are cut, the edges are clean, you know, that the houses are pristine, and people want to protect that, and they want to be able to have a high quality of life. That's why when the fake defund the police movement came out, it was soundly rejected by the homeowners in Southeast Queens because they want to have a positive working relationship with the police department. They want to have a police department that's responsible and respectful, and they do want change, but they don't want to see blanket slogans done, which would upend the relationship between civil service workers, because I also have the highest amount of civil service workers. I think I have more Black police officers in my district, more nurses, more teachers, more civil servants, more back office workers. So we have a new dynamic in the world that people want to eliminate property rights and eliminate home ownership, and think that property owners should be should give their property to people, allow people to live in there rent free. So we're in a different dynamic in the world, and it's something that we have to face. It was something that we have to take on, and we have to actually rally to push back on the craziness that's happening with some people in the world, because you can't own a property and not have to pay taxes, not have to pay utilities, not have to pay bills. And so why would you turn around and allow someone to tell you what to do in your property, that your largest investment that you've made as an individual, what to do with your particular property rights? So, those are the issues that we're going to have to face, and we're going to have to amp up to make sure that they're faced properly, so that, people that just got a PhD from XYZ can come and tell you what policy is in your private home, because it can't happen. So we have to get back to reality in this country on certain things. We have to push back on the notion of people just figuring that they can come in and change property rights at a whim. And we also have to come up with a real affordable housing plan, because there is a real issue for young people like yourself, for other young people that want to purchase homes in New York or want to have a place to live, to have an affordable place to live within their price range. So those are real things that we have to drill down into as a group, working with ABNY, developing those ideas and issues and talk about it, but not to be outpaced by sloganisms. Unfortunately, people are being moved by slogans and half-truths and information that is not really given an opportunity to drill down into the homeowner community, into the working community, but it's only being done by people that are advocating in certain silos and quietly until all of a sudden a policy is made, and then we all start reacting to the policy because it's totally separate from the reality of what we're dealing with in New York State. So I could go, there's some issues that are happening right now with transit-oriented development that were presented totally incorrectly, with the accessory dwelling units that were presented totally incorrectly, and the need to convert housing all around the state and to improve housing all around the state. The issues of homeless housing, one of the reasons why Governor Cuomo was so hated in Southeast Queens was because he eliminated Cremore. He eliminated the opportunities to create housing for mentally ill people. He took away those institutional properties that were functioning and working that his father actually built. And Cremore is in my district. It employed over 3,000 people. Over 2,000 of my residents lost their jobs. So that reverberates in a major way. And even more so, the policy of how we deal with mentally ill folk that need personal housing when they're not given the right type of housing and they're put in congregate shelters, only creates more problems. So we need to look at all of that in a respectful way, in a wholesome picture. We need to figure out how to build more housing for every category of person that we need to deal with, and we need to do it in an open forum so that we don't get into these the pieces of confusion, like what happened with transit-oriented development in the budget, and like what happened with accessory dwelling units in the budget, which both had to be eliminated and taken out because they were put in by people that don't have real-world experience and are trying to create new policy that doesn't meet the needs of our primary focus. The people that we really work on is the civil servants, the homeowners, the people that are really trying to make a difference by owning a piece of property in our state. So I know it's a long answer. It involves a lot of elements, but we can't allow people with short-sighted agendas to all of a sudden create policy that hurts the rest of the state. Thank you.
And I really appreciate that. And, and I'd love to stay in touch to create another forum to talk about sort of the issues and really unpack what you were talking about around the transit-oriented development, the TOD, and the accessory housing. I think, because as we think about affordability from the city and for the state, understanding the ramification on specific communities. I also appreciated you talking about sort of the stake Southeast Queens residents have in their homes. I remember I had a former employer who dropped me off one day and was like, "Oh my God, your house, this neighborhood is so beautiful. Look at the homes." I'm like, "Yeah, because all of our money is in our homes. This is our money. Your money's in your bank, probably. Ours is in our real estate. This is our investment. This is our legacy that we transition and transfer to our family." So I thank you for that. You also talked a lot about FIRST when you first opened up, right? You talked about sort of, the trailblazers in Southeast Queens that did a lot. So I'd like to turn it over to Governor Paterson, who is a trailblazer for many, many reasons. But I want to switch it up a little bit and talk about, how your career really spanned from representing a local constituency during your time in the state Senate to specifically looking at the Upper West Side in Harlem, to serving citizens of the entire state of New York, first as Lieutenant Governor and then as the first African-American governor of the state of New York. Can you talk a little bit about what changes in your mindset as a Black public servant, moving from serving the needs of your specific district to the needs of the entire state? On behalf of the different systems that were in play, and how did you prioritize change, and how did you navigate those complexities?
So when I first came to the state Senate, just my candidacy was controversial because the Senate district that was known as a Black Senate district that was originally held by Judge James Skizz Watson, who became a giant in the United States Customs Court, and then Constance Baker Motley, who, of course, became the first African-American borough president, and then inevitably her judicial career was exemplary. And after that initial service, all of the Black state senators from that district lived on the Upper West Side. And most of the services went to the Upper West Side. So my candidacy was an insurgent one to try to get equality for Harlem right within the Senate district itself. Mm-hmm. But in order to achieve that, I had to service the Upper West Side community because that was part of my district as well. So I think I took this point of view from the initial part of my service that you've got to represent all the people that are in your district. And you have to, be a visionary and think about the people all around the state, since this is where the legislature meets, around the state of New York. So I tried to travel around and go to different places and meet different people. And I'd go to upstate New York and they'd tell me, oh, they leave us out downstate. They don't give us anything, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, listen, I live 5 miles from City Hall. I don't live 300, 400 miles away from the seat of government. I live 5 miles from there. They don't listen to me ever. So the point really was just that I think that the demographics of my district tailored my service in the beginning, and I was actually able to forge some coalitions. So for instance, one of the problems we were having in Harlem is that they were tearing down these beautiful buildings for new constructions that, didn't look like anybody was paying any attention to the architecture in the neighborhood. So we started a landmarks preservation organization, and inevitably we went to the Upper West Side, who had these types of landmarking organizations and knew how to get the Landmarks Commission to create siting districts, which we were able to do in Harlem. But we probably couldn't have done it without the acumen that the West Siders had already attained doing that for themselves. On the other hand, the drug issues that first hit Harlem in 1985, particularly crack, were now making their way down the West Side. And there was a situation where a tenant challenged the drug dealers on her block and was eventually murdered. Wow. And so what I was able to do was to bring the block leaders from uptown down to 92nd Street, where that occurred, and at a community meeting about how when you know who the drug dealers are, we don't need you to go and talk to them. We need you to report them. And this is how to report it to the police anonymously and get action without risking your own life. So it was that sort of collaboration. And, it paid off for me, down the road, because I'd never dreamed I'd be asked to run for lieutenant governor. But when I went to different places to get support, I'd already been there on other ventures. So that was helpful. And then, of course, as governor, now you represent the whole state. But sometimes, even as governor, you've got to let some parts of the state know that other parts of the state have been left out and it's their time. And people, you see, whenever there's diversity and inclusion, there is a certain amount of exclusion. And so you have, sometimes organizations and people who just always think that they should be the first to the table. And what I tried to do is to spread that opportunity around so that everybody got a chance to be first now and then.
Right. That is, and sometimes it's really understated, but it's so powerful how you talked about sort of building the coalitions, right? Because I think sometimes that's missed. And, in thinking about building coalitions, I always say we have a lot more in common than we do our differences. And, I think that, again, has been sort of a recurring theme throughout a lot of the responses today, when Senator Comrie sort of talked about, changes in his constituency, or, people telling his constituents what they need, not recognizing sort of the trailblazers that have been in those communities for decades. And, instead of going at it through a coalition perspective, going at it as, you don't know what you're talking about. Borough President Gibson sort of talked about, again, coalition building, bringing stakeholders in partnership to address issues. And, that leads me to my next question for Borough President Gibson. Senator Comrie talked about sort of the defund the police and how that sort of went over in his district with his constituents. And, I really, want to hear from you, because we are very interested in your time in the city. And as we know, right now, we're really looking at sort of crime and public safety, because it's on top of mind for a lot of New Yorkers. And for you, and when you were in the city council, you chaired the public safety committee. So, really interested in, hearing from you how you were able to sort of navigate those tensions between interests of your local communities and the broader safety of the city. Two goals that are not mutually exclusive. People assume that they are sometimes, but seem to be portrayed as such in the media and in the discourse, in the public conversation across the city. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, that was not an easy time. It was the height of the pandemic. We lost $7 billion in revenue. We had a $9 billion budget deficit that we had to balance as council members, and we had to make a lot of tough decisions. And then we also saw the horrific murder of George Floyd. So it was all of these things coming together. One thing I always say as an elected, and my colleagues know, is I know where home is. I know the people that elected me and what they stand for. And no matter how big you get, how many caucuses and working groups you're a part of, you have to remember who you are and the values and principles that you have. You can't let anyone change you. So as the senator talked about, removing the word progressive, everyone wants to be progressive when it's popular. But when you have to take strong positions that are not popular, no one wants to call you a progressive. And it's important because balancing public safety is really about a delicate balance of achieving safety for everyone, but realizing that people define public safety in different ways. We have a huge generational gap where older New Yorkers associate the presence of police with the presence of being safe. Then you have a younger generation that's not necessarily about that, because they know, and we know, that shootings can happen on blocks where police officers are on patrol, right? Police officers have been shot. We know that, and we know that, although we are the safest, biggest city in the nation, perception and reality are two different things. People need to also feel safe as much as we talk about being safe. And so what we are trying to do, and what I've tried to do as a council member, chairing the committee, working with all of the NYPD, is really looking at programs that reinstitute the idea of beat cops, of getting back to bridging the gap, building relationships where cops knew us, they looked like us, they came from our neighborhood, talked language, they knew your grandmother, getting back to that village. With the creation of the NCO program a few years ago, I felt like that was a start, and we've seen some success where you take a precinct and you divide it into sectors, and you have NCO officers that just work with the people in that sector. They don't do 911 radio runs all day, but they actually build relationships beyond community affairs. So I felt like that was a good component, but obviously not the only thing. We have a real problem with an overabundance of guns. Everyone has a gun in New York City, and that is a challenge. But it's not just the idea of having a gun, it's also the mentality of using it. And we have seen a society that has been built on violence, where violence is the answer to everything. So if we have beef, we have a crew fighting one crew on the other side of the street. Nobody owns these streets, by the way, but we all try to claim ownership of it. And people are shooting each other back and forth. And the challenge I have is that a lot of the victims and the suspects all look the same. They all come from the same neighborhood, same areas, same schools, families go to church together, and yet we can't get along. It is a hard balance. So when you hear words like defund, like you go crazy, because it's not about a discontinuation of an entire agency, but it was merely about shifting funding that we felt needed to be in the areas of healthcare, mental health, youth development, summer jobs, and all the other things. The NYPD still has a multi-billion-dollar budget, and they're not going anywhere. They are a part of the solution and not the problem, but they're not the only solution. So what I want New Yorkers to understand is that public safety is working with NYPD, but it's also jobs and community centers and mental health and healthcare and getting people off the streets, not sleeping in shelters and in the subways and all these other things we talk about. All of that is public safety, lighting, cameras. People have an expectation to feel safe. And as the borough president, I hear that all the time. But guess what? I hear it from everyone. The low-income worker, the single parent, the cop, the guidance counselor, the social worker. I hear from everybody because everyone has an expectation to be safe. And it's our job to make sure they not only feel safe, but they are safe in our streets, in our parks, our playgrounds, on our subways. We have a lot of work to do. And Mayor Adams has a plan, and a lot of the components of that plan will work. There are some parts that will be a little controversial. We get that, but it's not anything that's impossible. When people come together with the right mindset, all it is, Madam President, is about how we get there. We may not all agree along the way, but I just want to get to public safety for everyone. I don't want babies to be shot in car seats and kids to be shot in playgrounds, or you get shot at a vigil for somebody else that got shot. Like, that's not normal. And I always say that it's not normal. We should expect and demand more, but we are a part of that too. Everyday New Yorkers are a part of keeping each other safe as well.
I really appreciate the way you sort of unpacked the discourse around public safety, because it's not a one or another type of discussion. It's very complex. And I think, you know, you sort of summed it up probably one of the best ways that I've heard it in a very long time. So I really, really appreciate it. So we are a minute over. We talked about a lot of important things today. We touched on public safety, which is a controversial issue, especially in the Black community. We talked about what it means to be Black, right? I think, you know, we hear and we talk about that a lot. We talked about the need for coalition, right? Extending an arm outside of the Black community and other constituents to all fight for the same things that we have in common. And we talked about, you know, outsiders coming in and telling the Black community what they need, right? Like, these are things I think that are discussed all the time amongst our friends and our households. And I think it needs to be talked in the public more. So I really appreciate it. And I think there needs to be a part 2, a part 3 to this discussion, because I think we could go on and on and on. But to wrap up today's Black History Month conversation here with ABNY, I'd love for each of you to tell me your favorite Black-owned business in your borough or where you live or in your neighborhood, and also give us some restaurant suggestions. You know, one thing that I started a couple of years ago was for Black History Month was a Black restaurant crawl. And every week I got a group of friends and we went to every borough and we did a crawl. So I would love to hear your favorite suggestions for restaurants as well. I'll start with Senator Comrie.
My favorite Black-owned restaurant is The Door, because I saw it from its inception. Everybody knows The Door now, but those were two people that were accountants working down in Wall Street, and they decided to start a business. And they started from a bar, and now it's into, they've expanded fourfold, and I was able to work with them to get the parking with the New Jerusalem Baptist Church. I want to shout out New Jerusalem for allowing them to expand, and now the door is a restaurant that every elected official, every person in the city knows about now for their food. My favorite business, I'd have to say, is Ernest Foods, which is a new business, but he is the first organically minority-owned supermarket in Southeast Queens. We do have Dawn Kelly. I got to give Dawn Kelly a side shout out. I got to give, the guys at Live Kitchen a shout out. I got to give, I'm gonna get in trouble now.
You only have one favorite. You only have one favorite.
I know, but I gotta give for business. I gotta give for business though. The business person that was a creator, and I mentioned him, but he passed, and she passed just recently. I mentioned Leroy Carmichael, who was a Black business owner from the 70s that owned the first oil company. But I have to shout out Renee Bluford. She was the first Black business owner for an Allstate in Southeast Queens. She did it right. She was not only just a Black business owner, but she was a trailblazer in so many things, from the NAACP to the links to to all of the major organizations. There wasn't one thing that Renee or her husband David did, because David was part of the Ocean Bill-Brownsville movement when they took over the school system. So they were early OGs. They were early folks that were unafraid to take on government, to empower people, and to also train other people. And we just lost Renee last month, who was a truly a powerful woman and a really Black business leader that we all need to emulate in our community. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Borough President Gibson, favorite restaurant recommendation and favorite Black-owned business.
Wow, there's so many in the Bronx. And as I travel around, I am certainly seeing the West African community owning so many of our businesses. We love jollof rice. And then I am also Caribbean American from Trinidad. So I love all of the Caribbean eateries. One of my favorites is Flavor International. I just did a pop-up a few weeks ago at the beginning of the month for Black History Month, and just rolled up on them and got some fried dumpling and some roti. And I just really wanted to highlight a lot of the businesses, Black-owned business. There are a number of them, but I think Ultimate Grill on East Gun Hill Road, shout out to the Northeast Bronx, is one that is Black-owned. And there are so many, and I think that's a good thing, but we obviously want to do more. Our businesses are our hubs, and they are a reflection of us. We all love good food. And so I do have to kudos to the senator, because I actually love the door too. And whenever I'm in Southeast Queens, I go to the door. I got spots all over. When I'm in the village of Harlem, I go to Melba's. Yes, yes, yes. Because I do want to make sure I show love everybody, everywhere, to everybody. But Ultimate Grill, Black-owned, Flavor International is one of my favorite Caribbean and soul food spots. I love Caribbean food and soul food equally. So you often receive with mac and cheese, candy yam, collard greens, and I gotta have curry chicken, jerk chicken, and some oxtail. So I love it all.
All right, you guys are not making this easy. Governor Paterson, let's close us out with your recommendations.
My favorite restaurant is now Melva's at 114th Street and Frederick Douglass Boulevard. And Melva, of course, was the niece and lived in the shadow of Sylvia's, which was a previous favorite restaurant of mine. And my favorite business is DAP Strategies LLC, owned by myself.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you all. This has been amazing. I can't wait till we do this again, hopefully in person very soon. You guys have been amazing panelists. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Stephen for our closing remarks.
I just want to thank the governor. I want to thank Madam Borough President. I want to thank the senator. This was an amazing conversation for us. I thought of things I could quote. I did want to go with "your credit won't get it," but I'm going to pull back on that and say the other line the borough president said was, I know where home is. ABNY knows where home is, and it's a big deal to us. And home means a lot of different things to different people in our diverse communities, and it is really important to us at ABNY that we not be afraid to bring our communities together, to work together to solve the problems and to highlight the amazing diversity of our different communities. And so we're really proud to be able to have you amazing leaders from the Black community to highlight this for Black History Month. And we look forward to doing more with you together. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say we couldn't be more proud as ABNY to have our CEO be Melva, who has done an amazing job and has been rocking it since the day she came to work with us. And so we're going to keep on keeping on. So,
that is very sweet. And as Leroy said, I'm young. That's the most important part.
That's one of us.
All right, thank you, and enjoy the rest of Black History Month, everyone.
Thank you.